Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new Record Club episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. If you haven't seen this week's main episode, then what are you fucking doing? We covered two new albums, which is apparently a rare thing we do these days, but we've come back in full form to review two new albums. They were the new Alexis Marshall album and the new album from Dark Side. So yeah, and now we're here talking about August's recommended album this week, a biggin, a fucking biggin. It's At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command. August, why don't you tell us a little bit about Relationship Command and At the Drive-In and why you decided to pick this for the Record Club?
So, At the Drive-In are the post-hardcore group, iconic post-hardcore group from El Paso, Texas, consisting of Cedric Bixler Zavala and Omar Rodriguez Lopez of the Mars Volta, along with
Beto
Paul
O'Rourke.
That's the other one. Paul,
It's a trio.
Not credited on this album, curiously enough.
Paul Hinojos on bass, Tony Jafar, and Keely Davis on guitar. But they are the five-piece who form At the Drive-In, this legendary post-hardcore group, initially only around for a handful of years, producing two records that were a lot more rough, scrappy, that ultimately led up to what many see as the zenith of their sound, certainly the zenith of their sound in terms of their place in culture, their most influential record, Relationship of Command, in which they brought on producer Ross Robinson, who brought something more melodic, harmonious, and almost emotive to this record than their previous two more hardcore leaning records had, while also still keeping up that aggressiveness, that ferocity. And as such, it's become a cultural landmark, one of the best albums in the post-hardcore genre. I think that's indisputable if you're looking at it just objectively in terms of influence, anything. And also, this is to kind of, I picked this to kind of complete my narrative from last week, where we talked about Brainiac's album, Hissing Prigs and Static Couture, which had a huge influence on At the Drive-In and the Mars Volta. Mars Volta we've obviously already covered, B-sides video on them. Check that out if you haven't. And also, just because we've all heard this album, we all love this album, let's talk about something really fucking good.
Co-sign, because that was some real shit you just said. This is a landmark, as you say, generally regarded as one of the greatest post-hardcore records, even if it comes a bit later on, I guess, than some of the more generally regarded like pioneering landmarks of post-hardcore, like bands like Drive Like Jehu, for instance. What the attraction of At the Drive-In is that, especially particularly on this record, is that real melodic focus, that real catchiness, that real sense of sustained intensity that is also oriented around really, really sharp and invigorating songwriting. And that's the thing that I'm always bowled over by every time I come back to this record, is just how catchy and addictive and really easy to lock into it is. This is not a record like other post-hardcore records in the genre where it's quite a demanding listen that takes a lot of energy out of you or requires a particularly, I guess, left field approach in order to truly get on board with. Certainly there's a lot of criticism here. I mean, anyone who has spent any amount of time, wrestling with the lyricism of Cedric Bixler Zavala knows that it is all but a fruitless task to try and thoroughly unpack everything that this man is talking about. But I mean, he has this thing where he's able to, even if you have no idea what the shit he's talking about, he has this way of conjuring really specific images and coming up with really specific lines that really sink into you. And he also has a fucking godly voice, just kind of comically good voice. Like he's such a good singer in ways that are so broad and so like in your face that it's almost like it's like, whoa, okay, geez.
And something I do want to note on the like broader appeal of this record is I would say these are by far the easiest to unpack of Cedric's lyrics. They're the most direct, but that's also not to say they're direct, because direct for Cedric is like miles away from direct for anyone else.
Yeah,
Lucid.
absolutely. And I'm actually very curious, August, I'm sure you probably have a little bit more than I do in terms of insight into some of the subjects that Cedric tackles on this record, even if, broadly and from an angle. Because every time I put this on, I get so swept up in just the raw sound of it, and also the hookiness of it as well, like the most addictive nature of the songs on this record. Every song on this record, without fail, has a catchy chorus or a catchy refrain or some kind of beware. I must have read 1,000 faces.
I must have wrapped them up their cause.
Oh God!
Yes.
Have you ever tasted skin?
Yes. I mean, we could just we
can sing the whole album. Frankly, we could.
Send transmission to the one-off sensor.
Get away! Get away! Yes.
God.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll get into the individual songs of this record because how can we not? But like the thing you're bowled over by every time you listen to it is just how consistently something will get stuck in your head, or it'll worm its way into you, and you'll just be absolutely head banging along to this record. It's
worm your way through distant earths.
Yes, and that addictiveness and that catchiness and that immediacy is all the more impressive for the fact that Cedric does write so cryptically, even if compared to the Mars Volta, it's a walk in the park. He has this great way of having this very sort of, obviously he goes on these long sort of spiels where he'll talk about
like on
the words you posted in the chat earlier, intravenous and something else.
Yeah, whatever.
Like on Invalid Letter Department, I think is a song you're really getting at here, where he's just kind of rambling about these words, phrases, ideas that don't seem to really coalesce into anything when you're listening to it, but just this sweeping kind of winding, ticking way and method cadence with he delivers his vocals is really captivating and compelling.
Yeah, and he'll do all that, and then he'll always give you something to hold on to. Like he'll utilize repetition and hooks to make it so that it's not just pure overwhelmingness. Like you'll always have that repetition of dancing on the corpse's ashes, that repetition of into the wishing well, those individual images that the song gives you and that Cedric kind of circles around really kind of pummels into you as like this is the real sort of thing I want you to be thinking about, this image when you are listening to this song. It's very powerful, it's very potent, it's very effective, and you don't necessarily have to know what the songs are about, or you could have a broad interpretation and still be quite satisfied with the experience.
Perhaps we can, as a launching off point, perhaps we can discuss the, at least in my opinion, fucking incomparable opening track, Arsenal, which has one of my favorite buildups in all of music. That's sort of like it's like machine slowly starting up, and it's just like, and you just kind of hear this drone in the background. It's just like, and it's just like, what in the goddamn hell is happening here? And you probably
and
not
then
going to
you've
stop
got
asking
that
that
like
question.
Train hiss where it sounds like a train like starting up. It's such a great way to. It's such a great instrumental hook.
And
there's just some guitar shit happening.
The loudest snare of all time.
Yeah, shout out Tony Hajar. His work on this record, I mean, just generally the rhythm section work on this record of Tony and Paul is absolutely stunning. I mean, I think of things like the Paul's bass line opening of Quarantine that kind of is so like sort of skin crawling and but also really you just a great bass line, and it just pulls you in before the song is even kicked in. And they have a great moments throughout the record where they will utilize simple elements to kind of reel you in, and then they will kind of just all come down on you.
And Arc Arsenal is such a great opener because it also establishes one of the kind of primary lyrical motifs of this whole record, in that being that of serial killers, murderers, and just delving into the depravity and the places of human psychology most people don't want to go to, most people don't want to think about it, most clearly stated in the have you ever tasted skin lyric, and also the having read 1,000 faces and robbing them of their cause, to me clearly evokes this idea of a sociopath looking through a crowd of people just before his execution. He knows, he feels he can pick apart every single person who isn't letting out their inner demons, their inner animals, and that's really the terror of Arc Arsenal and why it's such a strong, compelling opener to me.
Yeah, I mean that line, who's in charge here? Because I'd really like to meet him. The way he sings that, and just the sense of real
God.
menace, and that is very just.
Meet him!
It's fucking terrifying, honestly.
And that's further evocative of that kind of death row image this song is evoking.
Totally, it's an incredible opener. It's just absolutely perfect.
I mean, we've already kind of memed about it a little bit, but like one of my favorite things about this is absolutely the delivery that he has, as just like, because even for Cedric, this is like when he says beware, it's almost like too unhinged, and that's why it has a lot of personality that I really, really love. When he's just like when he starts the first syllable, it sounds like a normal kind of like post-hardcore scream, but then he just kind of takes it to the next dimension where he's like, it's just like, dude, are you good? And that sort of like really angry delivery.
So much cocaine.
Oh, the only way an album like this could be made is under the influence of some incredibly potent uppers. Like,
well, I believe that Cedric and Omar were both in the throes of a heroin addiction at the time of recording this. I'm not 100% familiar with the specifics of the history, but
they weren't sober.
There are absolutely allusions across this record to drug use and to the sense of like an elevated consciousness, maybe, let's say, and that certainly informs the performances as well. It's just not to say that this is a purely a product of drug abuse or anything like that, but simply that the experiences that Cedric in particular was having was heavily informing his approach to this record, and that in tandem with the collaboration with Ross Robinson really feeds into the particular kind of throttling immediacy and just general throat pumping consistent barrage this record is, particularly in relation to the two records that precede it.
There's also the next song, Pattern Against User, which I think is a terrific way to just sort of like start off the album proper a little bit. Kind of gives you a little bit of the melodic sensibilities of this band a little bit. It's a little bit like there's a strangeness to the melody. It's like really distinct, but it's also like, you know, na 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 na, like it's very like it's descending and kind of like wiggly and weird, but it's like it's still just as catchy. And god damn, the fucking bass line on this song is the hottest thing I've, like, when you can really hear it in like the middle of the song, it is just absolutely virtuoso shit all across the album, really, but particularly here because it's very audible.
Yeah, the melody on that song for something as aggressive as it is unbelievable.
And this song, it's really such a great continuation of those core themes of depravity and the dark parts of the human mind, this time being a bit more self-reflective, as is the next song, One Armed Scissor, really delving into the band's increasing drug dependence that would ultimately cause them to kind of collapse after this album. This song, I think, being very evidently about having this profound need to constantly get high and get out of the world you're living in. The circus carney guarding the gates of heaven being a really clever metaphor for a drug dealer, and worming your way to distant earth, I think, evoking this idea of a heroin cutting off the blood flow to the arm. It's really striking imagery. I adore it so much. Then we've got one of this album's lead single, actually, One Armed
Great lead single
Scissor,
choice.
which it's just one of their most mind-blowingly exciting songs. Like that that leads right into the chorus is it's so catchy and just the most, it's such an immediate way to get you into this song. It's so memorable, and also as I mentioned, this continued image of drug addiction and dependence being kind of elaborated on here. Also, this taking that very personal twist of talking about touring, this being a million miles away when I write you this letter, and alcohol, a one-armed scissor reportedly being an alcoholic drink, a mix between, I believe it's whiskey and Red Bull, or like vodka and Red Bull.
No.
Yeah.
Hellish.
God, it's a miracle that didn't kill them.
Yeah, what I love about this song so much is that it really simulates the kind of headspace of being like totally, like it really gets you into the headspace of being totally fucking wasted, and it adds a certain intensity to that really makes you feel the weight of that and the tumultuous nature of the effect and impact that was having on Cedric, on Omar, on the band. It is just an absolutely devastating song.
And that refrain of cut away is this really great image, kind of evoking this idea of like a documentary crew following them around and like, cut away, don't show this part.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it's also like it's a double layered sort of pun as well. If you're to take one arm scissor in terms of its meaning of the drink, and that it is having this effect of kind of cutting away at the stress or the pain or the pleasure, alternatively, depending on how you want to interpret it. Like it's a beautiful multi-layered bit of wordplay.
I have no frame of reference for this album, like from a cultural or even like a reception standpoint, beyond just knowing that this is a widely acclaimed album. But in terms of songs brought up on this record, I do not hear Sleepwalk Capsules discussed very often, which is weird because this is like top 3 for me. This song is fucking insane. It just immediately, like there's sort of like, the first song had like a build to it. There's like a structure of, kind of building and tension or energy and releasing. Like this is just at 10 immediately. And God bless, there's just so much like memorable lyrics and hooks just kind of tossed into here, and just the melody that Cedric brings with his voices again, just really, really memorable. Like it sounds almost like rhythmic, but when you like put it all together, it sounds like a very jagged melody, and then you like sing along with him, which that is the optimal way to experience this album. Is you play it in your car and you blast it as loud as you can and you scream literally every single lyric you can recognize, and then this becomes like seeing the fucking Matrix, especially this song. I would advise not to do it while in a place where you are in danger of speeding, because you will kill someone.
In a album of nothing but Cedric peaks, this is like one of the peaks of that. Just him at if this album goes up to 11, he's at 15.
And then that middle section kind of gives you that perfect little lull in the energy.
Yeah,
but
that
it's like everything's
Lazarus through the
super
party
busy
bridge.
still.
Mm.
Yeah, that part's great. And then the guitar's like wow, wow, wow. Oh, fuck.
Mm. Yeah, and my favorite song on this record is Invalid Letter Department, which has already been alluded to a couple of times, but I find this song incredibly moving and heartbreaking, and I can't quite articulate why. I certainly am not very familiar with. I don't know if there's a particular inspiration for this song, but the lyrics evoke this kind of almost genocidal scene of just this utter devastation that has been wreaked. And the specifics of the imagery that are used in this song are so vivid in the visuality, like so like that chorus refrain of "On my way, nails broke and fell into the wishing well." That's a mixture of poeticism and this sense of like genuine crushing nails underfoot. Obviously, the repeated reference to corpses and just this thick atmosphere of doom is very powerful. It's one of the longer tracks on the record as well. It really has the sense of the sweeping nature to it. But it's also very thoroughly anchored in some of those hooks. And that mixture of the real, just overwhelming darkness of the song with that catchiness and that real appeal that it has makes for some of the most compelling music I think At the Drive-In ever made.
And if I may shed some light on the real life context, this song is a protest song of sorts, to the femicides in Ciudad Juarez, a city in northern Mexico, very close to the Texas-American border, where over a period of what's listed on Wikipedia of about 13 years, there were 370 female homicides in this one town.
Jesus.
And this song is a response to that with the lyrics, with the image, and they made sure all of that all of the obituaries showed pictures of smokestacks, being kind of this evocative image keying you into this idea that these were not wealthy women who were being murdered. These were working class women who were being killed off, and there's no real official explanation for why these homicides happened. There's no official person that's linked to it. There's been a great deal of controversy around the convictions that have been made. There's been 3 for 370 people, which is obviously completely unrealistic. So there's a lot of talk of corruption and all this. And yeah, I think that real life context, while not necessary, does perfectly coincide with everything you said about the song, Tyler, that it does do a really great job at evoking that specific image, that idea.
There's just some really striking lines in this song that are just deeply upsetting. As their shoes gripped the dirt floor in the silhouette of dying is a very evocative image from Cedric. And yeah, polyester satin nailed jewelry lips while the guillotine just laughed again. This real sense of evoking an execution that is happening, like a deliberate and systematic murder. That's quite powerful, and yeah, it's deeply upsetting and an absolutely staggering song in my opinion.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite on here too. Although, like, I have said on several occasions that Arc Arsenal changed my life and how I view music, because there's a performance of them playing it at the Big Day Out Australian Festival, and it's like unhinged is too delicate a word, and it's just like, oh, I didn't know people could do this.
Yeah.
Anyway, point is that song isn't even on my top 3, and it literally changed my life. So this is not quantifiable. But yeah, that's probably my favorite of all of these. Basically because it's Cedric at his most lucid, really. I find it his most compelling. maybe that's just because exclusively that I have some grasp of what's going on, as opposed to not ever. I often think of post-hardcore as like progressive punk.
Yeah.
Like it's what
Yeah.
It's a good way of
progressive rock
describing
is
it.
to just rock and roll. And I think that's like no better embodied by something like Invalid Litter Department.
100%
Yeah.
agree.
Yep.
Totally. Probably just so that we don't get too kind of formless and take too long. We don't necessarily need to go through all of these in sequence. But what other? I'm curious, like what other specific parts of the record? And August, maybe you can lead us through this. What other specific parts of the record kind of stand out with regard to what Cedric and Omar are trying to do, and what Cedric is trying to talk about in terms of the recurrent themes of this record?
What jumps out to me immediately are the two appearances of Iggy Pop on this record in
Yeah.
terms of this
It's gonna bring
upholding
that
and
up.
carrying on of this themes. Of
Hello,
course,
Mother Leopard. I have your cub. You must protect her, but that will be expensive. 10,000 cola nuts wrapped in brown paper. Midnight behind the box. I'll be the hyena. You'll see.
and yes,
And do
that's
that in the Hoffman voice. 10,000 cola nuts.
Yes.
I'll be
Anyway,
the hyena you see.
and this appearing on the track Enfilade. This track, I really love the kind of stereotypical like lady tied to a train track imagery with the freight train coming, freight train coming on the chorus. Of course, Iggy Pop's kind of over the top introduction of this Mother Leopard is a really great little tone setter. That's quite funny, and I mean this track also just the guitar is just so much. And the last note I wanted to add about this song is you're also almost seeing a couple of the developments of Mars Volta shit, of the beginnings of Mars Volta, especially with that very reverberated, processed vocal snippet on the verses.
Just like Elvia Kez sounds exactly the same.
Yeah. I also sense a little bit of maybe a continuation of the sort of political subtext of parts of this record on this song. It's this kind of like, as you've already alluded to with the freight train lines, it's this kind of almost like cliche story of these kidnappers and their victims, but obviously told through Cedric's very cryptic and weird and, you know, verbose style. But I suspect that it's probably, intended as a bit of a metaphor for perhaps some kind of political subtext that's maybe not dissimilar to. It just has that vibe to me in terms of.
Oh no,
relation to
I
the songs we've
completely
already talked
agree
about.
with what you're saying here. I think you're completely nail on the head with that idea and assertion that this song has some political leanings, especially with the lines unconscious tide and gags being thrown into the chorus and sacrifice on the railroad tracks, almost implying this degree of martyrdom by some kind of larger force or a corporation to like pinning like, oh, this bad thing happened, so now that's justification for this.
Yeah, and once I sort of started to get a bit of a handle on some of those things that were seeping through some of the things that Cedric was singing about, I definitely started to feel like I was getting a bit more of a hold on this record. And it's one of the more rewarding aspects of it, I think, is the fact that it just pummels you so brutally and so aggressively, but then the more you react against that, the more you kind of fight against the pummeling and try to dig into what's happening underneath it, you see this rich text that's happening as well, that again is perhaps, beholden to the violence of the music.
I think the fact that it's in a trio that bookends a song called Mannequin Republic, which is, of the three of these, is the one that I have the least grasp on.
Yeah, that's the song I think that has allusions to concentration camps in it, I think, from memory. there's like a sense of like people being kind of
Yeah,
herded,
labor
controlled.
labor concentrated in this sheepless chapel is, I
Drove
think,
stakes into the main camps.
Yeah, so there's like the
yeah,
sense of people being I love that refrain as well if they call it a wasteland baby, which I realized reading on this most recent listen might be where this is a weird point of reference, but it might be where Hozier got the inspiration for his sophomore album, which is called Wasteland Baby. Just a random piece of musical trivia that I happen to know.
It's a very
I-
specific combination of words, so you might be onto something.
And
Although I do not believe that Hozier takes inspiration.
no, but it's like, holy shit. I can't imagine someone like him listening to this, but he seems like a cool dude. Anyway, the song is fucked up. It's about, yeah, people being herded and controlled. And again, that's just, he has this way of using words like sutured and fucking Auslander and these really like verbose terms to kind of like make a very specific visual image that is kind of surreal and just kind of upsetting. Yeah.
And also Paul Hinojo's bass.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
And fucking delivery of shapeless chapel. Fuck, he just holds that note for so long. It's so good.
and yeah, I think the idea of that being of a piece with the previously mentioned Iggy Pop song and Rolodex Propaganda, which Morgan made, I think is a really good, it's a really good way to kind of group these songs together. And I might even extend that to Quarantined, the next song, which to me, these songs all have this kind of thematic thread of this idea of a spark starting a fire or using some small incident to build up to this larger frenzy and panic over something. And I think that's a lot of where the more punky tendencies of this album come in, this rejection of escalating things and what people are telling you. And in a sense, it's very predictive of the Bush presidency and what would come directly after it with 9/11. So I think that's a really fascinating way this album has aged, and probably part of the reason it manages to be so influential with that really predictive, forward-thinking aspect to its lyricism.
Yeah, I love that. Quarantine is a great song. I love this idea, like it. So it uses this metaphor of a virus and a quarantine, and obviously it almost seems too obvious to point out, but like obviously that's has its own contemporary relevance. It's particularly lines like "I seem to have forgotten the warmth of the sun," which is just yeah. But yeah, it's a fucking barn burner, and it's quite potent. And again, I can tell that Cedric is constructing an elaborate metaphor. I just haven't quite unpacked what it is in reference to, like what he's kind of the underlying things that he's getting at. But yeah, he talks a lot about the spread of toxicity, the spread of violence, the spread of depravity and destruction.
The toxicity of our city. Sorry.
Yeah, saw that coming. But yeah, and that's an attractive
Had
theme
to.
that is expounded on really nicely and in a way that's like, oh shit, relevant on this particular song. Yeah, and I mean, obviously lines like a single spark can start a spectral fire, obviously standing in as a pretty clear allusion to warfare that, again, in the context of the song and in the context of the quarantine virus metaphor, that human inhumanity as this kind of virus that spreads and becomes increasingly devastating is really powerful.
And I guess that leaves us with only really the closer non-zero possibility, which is just immense. that opening phrase, I'm just tired of counting bodies, is
Ugh.
bone chilling.
Especially with the sound play at the beginning
Susan
too, of
is
just like the
hungry.
reversed audio is what it sounds
They
like. It
still
sounds like
eat their
it's
young.
just. I mean, it sounds like the Mars Volta, honestly, when it starts with that piano and stuff. It's just like you can totally tell where these guys were going and what direction they were headed in. Because I mean, like
Oh,
this is
yeah.
in the same vein as shit like Televators. I mean, it's oh god, it's so fucking
Oh
it's
yeah,
brutal, but
absolutely.
it's good.
It is the televators of this record in a sense, this
Mhm.
reprise, and it feels to me like this summation of everything that's come up to this point, this idea of this really apocalyptic hellish imagery conjured in tracks like Mannequin Republic is brought back in full force here to craft an image of like some kind of concentration labor camp, but also at once evoke this idea of just counting the bodies of all the friends you've lost because of the aforementioned drug addiction. And it is a really great ending point for this record.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a song that seems to me to be about like this the overwhelming weight of destruction and existing in the wake of destruction and feeling kind of powerless to the ongoing destruction of the world, I guess, as Cedric sees it. I love the line, "Let's just paint you a pretty face," which is a kind of beautifully
Oh.
moving little encapsulation of the ways in which certain people who have the power to not engage in destruction will provide very cheap solutions that don't actually get to the heart of stopping the suffering. And it's a really emotionally tumultuous way to end the record, as I guess it would have to end in such a way like that to really draw together the pain and the anguish of the rest of this record. It's an absolutely fantastic closer and an absolutely fantastic bow to tie around the short-lived career of this particular iteration of the music that Cedric and Omar and obviously the other members of At the Drive-In would make before the script is flipped entirely with the Mars Volta, which is a totally distinct thing. Even if you can hear some of the seeds of it here, it wraps a nice bow around. I mean, this whole record really feels like a very definitive statement that everything that the project At the Drive-In had been building towards is kind of fleshed and finessed and expressed in this very holistic and fully formed way that is kind of impossible to really fault in any significant way anyway.
Yeah, I think the dissolving of the group, while certainly most actively influenced by things like Omar and Cedric being horrific drug addicts at this point in time, I think also part of what must have influenced it, if even just subconsciously, was the idea of like, we've taken this as far as it can go, and to do something else important, it needs to become something else. That's why I think this album and D-Louse have so much shared DNA. It's also why I find D-Louse to also be transitional, in a fun word we like to use on this show, because it just feels so much like they have to do something different, because I mean this is the peak of this sound, and it really hasn't been bettered since. They've just had to switch gears altogether.
Mm.
I really like how like dissonant the instrumentation sounds on this, and then it sort of builds to that end where like that final sort of minute and a half where it sounds like, I mean, the only way I can describe what it sounds like is it sounds like if you took a song from the Twin Peaks soundtrack and slowed it down by 50%, and then you just kind of like waited, and it's just like the saddest
loneliest sound ever. And it's just so strange considering that's how the album, I mean, not strange, but it's like it's appropriate considering how the album begins with this incredible, energetic, rising tension that just really gets you pumped up. And then the end is just like the absolute fucking Mariana Trench cavern opposite of that. It really is speaks to the whole, like, they took this as far as they could go. They just spanned the entire breadth of their whole sound.
And I know this record had some bonus tracks. And Morgan, you wanted to talk about those?
Yeah, the two bonus tracks are the ones that you'll find on streaming service, not clarified as bonus tracks, and
Yeah.
everybody's favorite trend of not fucking doing that. Extracurricular and Catacombs. I think it was a wise decision to leave extracurricular off, just because I think it's great, but it sounds a little too in keeping with the rest of the album in a way that it almost would have been redundant. But I'm glad it's out there, easily accessible. And Catacombs is just one of the most bouncy, energetic fucking tracks that these two ever made in anything they did together. And I wish it was on the album. I don't know where, but I do, because it's great.
And I guess one final comment I wanted to bring up before we wrap up, unless anyone has any other major things they're itching to contribute, are the band Omar Rodriguez Lopez's comments in particular coming after this album, namely his rejection and pretty much trashing of the production on this album, and the band not really being a terrible fan of this sound and of this direction of their sound.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that maybe the last people you should ever ask about a work of art is the person that made it.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I understand it, because you're always going to be critical of work that you made much earlier on. I mean, this album's 21 years old now, and they've done so much since, so it's natural to want to look back at, say that I think we missed the mark here. But no, it's incorrect.
I mean, I struggle to understand. Maybe I'm missing a nuance here, but like having a resistance or a hesitance to embrace the sound of this record as its makers, and then going to have your next record produced by Rick Rubin is
a choice.
But I guess perhaps they were hoping for more success from this sound in terms of a commercial appeal. Maybe, I'm not sure.
I mean, it was so fucked up.
Yeah.
So who knows how he views that time in life.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, the misery that seemed, from what I gather, to be permeating the band towards their end run, and in terms of there was some creative frictions, I think, that were going on around the time this record was made, and some of the tumultuous events that were occurring, some of which have already been alluded to, certainly all contributed to the fact that at the drive-in, which had been accelerating at this breakneck pace throughout the late 90s in terms of touring and releasing records and music, it kind of felt like it was running on exhaust fumes by the end. And so they made the smart decision to switch it up. But, that's... A record like Relationship of Command is all the more powerful and effective for what a grand closing statement it is. And as you say, Morgan, also feeling like it is still musicians like Omar, and I feel like we haven't shouted out Jim Ward enough either.
Yeah.
Who's obviously his interplay with Omar on this record is a hugely important part of the guitar sound and the way that the impact that this record has. And you really sense these players really coming into this fuller, more intricate and more ambitious realization of their sonic potential, of their potential as musicians at this very particular peak that they reach. And that is all of these things coalesce to make it such an important landmark in post-hardcore music.
Absolutely. Should we move into favorite tracks and ratings?
Let's do it. Jake, why don't you lead us off?
My 3 favorite tracks are gotta be our Carcinal, Sleepwalk, Capsules, and Non-Zero Possibility. I want to give a quick shout out to Quarantined. Also, that's a very, very close fourth for me. Least favorite track, I guess Rolodex Propaganda, maybe. Like it's good. It's still fucking knocks, but I guess I just like the rest of the songs a little bit more. But yeah, 9 out of 10.
Okay.
All right.
August.
Myself, I would say my favorites are One Armed Scissor, Invalid Letter Department, and Non-Zero Possibility. Least favorite for me is probably Cosmonaut. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Morgan.
My 3 favorites are Invalid Litter Department, Mannequin Republic, and Non-Zero Possibility. I least favorite. No. Try again. 11. 10. 10 out of 10.
Gotcha. Sersha gives it a 10 as well. My 3 favorite songs are Invalid Litter Department rather, Arc Arsenal, and let's pick a nice juicy deep cut for the third one, and I'm gonna say Quarantined. Least favorite track, Jake, I kind of feel the same as you about Rolodex Propaganda. I think it's a really good song. I just think that it is maybe slightly doesn't quite consistently hit the peaks of the other songs and serves more as a kind of fabric of the album thing rather than a standout. So I guess I'd pick that. And the album gets a 9.5 from me, which brings us to an average of 9.5.
9.5, yeah.
Average of correct.
Average of fuck yes. Suck my dick. That's right.
Okay. Yeah,
Fuck you.
0.5 standard
my
deviation.
Yeah, 0.5 standard deviation, 9.5 rating. Other records we've given a 9.5 include Spiderland by Slint, Ghosteen by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Anyway, let us know in the comments below what you think of Relationship of Command. Is it your favorite at the drive-in record, or are you like August and you secretly prefer it in Casino Out? Give us your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know. Obviously, check out our video on the Mars Volta discography. We'll put that in the link of the description as well. And yeah, August, take us away.
As always, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Avis. We try harder.
Let us know at home what you think of this record, what this record means to you. Is it your favorite Mars Volta record, or are you edgy like August and secretly prefer In Casino Out? Because I know August does.
This is not a Mars Volta record for a start.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Shit. Fuck me.
Morgan, gladly.
Gladly.
Or
don't act like you wouldn't.
My favorite Mars Volta record.
You would too, Jake. You know you would. Look at this piece of them. I was about to say piece of man, and that's not correct.
This piece of bimbo ass.
Piece of fucking flesh. Let us know. You're non-binary.
I'm gonna die.
You're transgender. That's so cool.